and in this video we're going to take a look at command line arguments in Node.js. So we've seen that you can write use strict like this at the top of your files. I'm in just an empty file here which I've called commandline.js, and you can declare variables like this. Let's write let greeting equals hello, and you can output stuff. You can print it on the console like this, console.log greeting. So I've declared a variable called greeting, I've assigned a value to it, hello, and I've printed the value in that variable. And I can run this from the command line by writing node and the name of the script. And it says hello. Now you can actually output multiple variables or values with console.log. So let's supposing I want to output a name or some text here. I can write comma and in single or double quotes a name. So I'm going to say hello to myself here, hello John. If I run this, let's try it, it says hello John. Notice there's a space between them, although there's no space here that you can see. Well, there is a space there, but the thing is JavaScript doesn't take notice of spaces in your code. It would take notice of a space in your string. Let's maybe change this to single quotes for consistency. It doesn't matter which you use though. Alright, I like to keep things consistent. But when you output multiple variables or values like this, it will helpfully separate them by spaces so that they're easier to read. Now, do try this out for yourself. And what I want to show you here is that there's a special kind of, well, it's actually what we call an array, argv, that contains various useful values. So let's try outputting stuff with argv here. So I'm going to write console.log and process. Don't worry about what process and console and stuff like this are just at the moment. Process.argv, and then we have two square brackets like this, an opening and a closing square bracket, and in there I'm going to write 0. Right, so we've got two console.logs. Let's run this program and see what it does. So we've got the hello John, that's still there, but what this console.log process.argv0 did was it output actually the location of node, the node program that we're using. You'll probably get something different. It just depends where you installed it and how you installed it, but you'll get the location of node, hopefully. If we change this 0 to 1, there's something else in there that is sometimes potentially helpful. And here we get, what is this? It's the location of the program that I'm running, commandline.js. That's the file that I'm actually running. And there's another possibility, process.argv2. Now if I run this, it's just going to say undefined, but here's what it actually does. Let's just clear this. I'll say node commandline.js, and I'm going to type something like giraffe, and it outputs giraffe. So you can see that this text here is actually outputting what I've typed on the command line here, which in this case was giraffe. Now if you've done some programming before, you'll recognize argv as a array, and if you haven't done any programming before, this will be like completely cryptic as far as you're concerned, but that's all right. That's all right for the moment. You'll come to understand this in time as we go through the course. Notice there are two places where I've written something dot something. There's console.log and there's process.argv. those are what we call objects in JavaScript. And if we search on the internet for Node.js global objects, there are a bunch of these things. Let's go to this link here at nodejs.org. And you can see in here there's console, there's process. There are a bunch of these global objects that we can access. Never mind about what they are, just know that there are several different ones. And in fact, log here is what we call a method. It's essentially a subroutine. It's some code that we can run, some lines of code basically. And argv is what we call an array, and we're going to be going through all this in great detail. But for the moment, let's just make use of this. So this process argv, let's get the value of it in a variable. Let's say let name equal process.argv. So whatever the user enters after the program, we will take that and we will put it in the variable name. And then when I do console.log, I'll write console.log greeting and then name. Okay, so again, if you've done programming before in some language, this will probably be very straightforward to you. But in case you haven't, it'll look a bit mystifying. Do type it out for yourself. Essentially, we've got two variables here. One I'm setting directly with what we call a string literal, an actual hard-coded value, a value I've written directly into my program. So greeting is assigned this value. We've got a variable called name, which is assigned a value from this thing here, and that thing there contains whatever you type after the name of your program when you run it. And then we're outputting both of these variables one after the other. Let's try this. And so I'm going to write node command line and some name like Joe or whatever. You can write your name there. Hello, Joe. Notice if I write two things, let's write a surname. It only picks up the first one. That's because it's considering this to be another what we call command line argument. So this is the first command line argument, and that's another command line argument. We could access that using the number 3, but we won't worry about that here. All I want to do is get some minimal stuff off the command line, and I'm happy just with one bit of text. Okay, try all that out for yourself. If you are a beginner, this stuff is confusing, and there is this just initial feeling of confusion that's always associated with learning programming at the beginning. And also, if you have programming experience and you switch from one language or framework to another, it doesn't persist as long, but often you sort of recreate that feeling of confusion slightly, and you just have to persist through it, because the important thing at the moment is that you type stuff and you just see what it does, and ideally experiment with it a bit yourself as well. And gradually this will become second nature to you. And as we go through this course, I'll be able to explain to you all of the stuff that's going on here. So eventually it will lose its mystery. But I can't just explain it all now, because the explanation would involve just too many different concepts and you would get lost. So you need to just practice this stuff that I'm showing you, kind of just practice typing it and getting it working, and you'll gradually get used to it. One thing that I should do here is, since I'm using Git in this course, I should check this into Git, but I'll do that after I've paused the video. Okay, so until next time, happy coding. Hello, in this video we're going to take a look at arithmetic in JavaScript and Node.js. If you've done some programming before, there are probably no surprises here, except that Java, C, C++ and some others have this concept of integer division, whereby dividing an integer by an integer always produces an integer or whole number. And there isn't such a thing in JavaScript, so division works as you might expect if you've never heard of that. But anyway, putting that aside, so addition works like you'd expect in JavaScript. let's do console.log 5 plus 4. Just zoom in a bit, maybe. Well, let's run this. So node arithmetic. Oh yeah, I called this 01080. Let's run this. 9, is that right? Yeah. Subtraction is it's exactly like you'd expect as well. Five. We've got multiplication. So let's say 3 times 4. So we use the asterisk symbol in JavaScript for multiplication, as we do in many other languages. And there's also division. Let's do maybe 7 divide by 2. So this is all pretty much the same as other programming languages. Let's just run it. 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. 3 times 4 is 12. We've got the mod operator as well. So the mod operator basically gives you the remainder from a division. So if I change this to mod, it's a percent sign. Let's just make a comment, mod operator. So 7 mod 2, well, if you divide 7 by 2, but then work out the remainder, so that's obviously 1. Let's run it. 1. And the mod operator actually in JavaScript will also work with, at least with Node.js, it will also work with values that aren't integers, that aren't whole numbers. So if I write like, I don't know, 12.3 divided by 3, let's say divided by 5, that gives us 2.3. So sometimes it can be a bit confusing because like numbers that are like floating point numbers can't be stored in a completely exact way, not only due to the nature of computing, but due to the nature of reality. If you've got like a number with an infinite number of decimal values after the decimal point, an infinite number of significant digits, you can't store it exactly. And so sometimes, like if you're expecting 2.3, you might get 2.299999 and so on, and you might wonder what's happened, but it's just kind of just the problem of being able to represent floating point numbers exactly. It just can't be done. But here you can see that if you divide 12.3 by 5, you can fit 2 5s into that, and you've got 2.3 left over, which is what the mod operator is giving us here. Usually you use the mod operator with integers in programming, and it can occasionally be very useful. There's also, it's probably worth mentioning, there's also a couple of what we call unary operators that apply to variables here. They're intended for use with integer variables or whole numbers. Well, that is variables that refer to a whole number value. So plus all of these, plus, minus, times, divide and mod, we call them binary operators. They operate on something. They operate on two numbers. Binary operator meaning like 2. It's an operator that operates on 2 things. So each of these basically takes in 2 values and then returns a third value, if you think about it. You know, like so we take, for example, 5 plus 4. We've got 2 values there, 5 and 4, and that produces, we can say, or returns a third value, which is 9. So we call these binary operators because they're operating on 2 things. There are also unary operators that operate on a single value. So let's say we've got a number like let value equal 2. If we do value plus plus in JavaScript, let's do console.log value, that just increases the value of this variable by 1. And if you're new to programming, hopefully you're beginning to get the idea of what variables do. I'll give you some practice with them later on, but you can use variables essentially instead of the values that they contain. They're kind of like a label for values in a way. So what this does is, so initially we declare the variable called value and set it equal to 2, and then we increment it. We increase the value of it by 1 using this plus plus operator, and then I'm going to output it, so we're going to see 3. So if I just run this, we get 3 there. There's another version of that looks like this. So hang on, let's maybe put that there, and then there's plus plus value as well. That does nearly the same thing. There is a difference between this we call the postfix version, and this the prefix version of it. There is a difference between them, which we'll doubtless see later on, but it doesn't really matter here for the moment. So you can see we've increased it again to 4, and we've got the same thing for like a minus minus version of it. So let's take a look at that. So we've got minus minus value, or there's the postfix version as well, like this. Looks like this. So that decreases the value of a variable that refers to a number by 1. So we've gone from 4 to 3 to 2. Okay, I think that's it for this video. What I'm going to show you next is we're going to implement a little program to convert temperatures between Fahrenheit and Celsius. So you can have a go at that if you want, if you think you might be able to figure out how to do it. If you've done programming before, it should be easy for you. And if you haven't, then it might be difficult, but see if you can do it. I need to check stuff into Git here. Usually I do it on the command line, but let's just see if I can actually do it using Visual Studio Code. So I don't usually do this, but we've got, if I go to this, there's this view here that shows us kind of the source control view. It's like this icon in the top, sort of near the top left here, sort of sharing type icon. And if I hover over it, it says source control. Several files I've got here have a U by the side of them to show that they are untracked. I haven't done a git add and a name of the file or a git add star. So I can add them to version control. I think with this plus value, if I hover over that, it says stage changes. Let's do that. And then the U goes away. Well, that actually seems fine. And so now I should be able to do a commit. If I hover over this changes, that gives me a stage or changes. Oh yeah, I see it. I couldn't quite remember how to do this, but once I've staged things for commit, I can then do a commit, and I can add a message here. Let's just put created in here, and then there's a tick at the top here to actually do the commit. Let's try that. I think that worked. Looks like it worked. I could verify on the command line here. If I do git status, yeah, the only thing I've got to do is a push to my remote repository. I'm not actually sure how to do that. Yeah, let's try clicking these dots and going to push. Does that work? Something's happening because I can see progress bar. Would you like code to periodically run git fetch? No, because no one's going to change this repository apart from me. Well, it did something. Let's have a look now. Git status. Yeah, looks like it worked. Okay, so we can do all our Git stuff from within Visual Studio Code clearly, but I do in general prefer the command line. It gives me more of a feeling that I know what's actually going on. Okay, we'll leave it there for this video. See if you can write a program that converts like Celsius to Fahrenheit or Fahrenheit to Celsius if you like, and we'll come back to this in the next video.